In a world filled with sharks, bears, and killer bees, one man is brave enough to stay indoors to bring you the latest in gaming, movie, and pop culture news. That man is Tom Awesome, and this is the Outside is Overrated podcast.
Hello and welcome to Outside is Overrated, a grown-up podcast about gaming and nerd pop culture. On this show, we discuss video games, books, TV shows, movies, and board games. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Tom Sedlacek, and we've got a great show lined up for you today. From savage sword fights to ancient ruins crawling with cosmic horrors, we're diving deep into the blood-soaked legacy of Conan the Barbarian. We all read The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian, a collection of short stories by Robert E. Howard. In the back half of the show, we'll also chat with local author Jake Rudquist about his book, We're All Dead Here. Joining me for the discussion today are the Hobby Box, Joe Burns.
Heyo.
The comic formerly known as the Rogue Hippo, Pat DeGeest.
Good to be here, Tom.
You sound so serious. And making his big league debut on the main show, longtime friend of Outside is Overrated, Mike Mathwig.
Gentlemen.
Welcome back to the show, guys. Mike, we're going to start with you. You've been a frequent contributor on our Game Club segment. I admire you for your commitment to the FromSoft line of games and how you've been able to plow through them without, as by your own admission, stellar Twitch reflexes. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and establish your nerd cred for our mainline audience?
Well, for nerd cred, I have the advantage of being older than dirt, so I have some easy ways to establish nerd cred by saying I saw Star Wars in a theater when it first came out in 1977.
Oh!
I started my gaming career with an Atari 2600 with full wood paneling and a single joystick.
I had one of those.
So my nerd cred is impeccable, thank you very much.
Yeah, and I mean, we met through a role-playing group. We have some mutual friends. We played D&D 3.5 together. We played Savage Worlds. We played Shadowrun together. So, like, you've seen Tom at his Thomas, although maybe that's somewhat muted for the group. But, like, you know, we became friends through role-playing, so I feel like we've already been fired in the crucibles.
Plus, we did play a little bit of online gaming, too, and that was an interesting experience, to say the least.
Oh, yeah, you were our coach in Overwatch. Like, I improved dramatically on that game with your coaching, just in, like, squad formation and positioning and times to push, times to fall back. Like, you were a terrific Overwatch coach. But that's
the only
enough.
online game I've played in many years, so I got pretty into that game for a while, so it was fun to do that.
Yeah, it was awesome. Those were good times. But for me, the wheel of OiO kept turning and had to move on to new things. And speaking of that wheel turning, Burnsy, we'll get to you soon. Pat, how's the comedy scene in Florida? I have a script and I am not deviating from it. Patrick, tell us everything.
I mean, first of all, Tom, you say that Mike has seen Tom at his Thomas, but he certainly hasn't seen you just backdooring me for no reason other than it feels good. So I feel like that is Tom at Tom's Thomas.
I disagree.
He hasn't seen that yet.
I disagree wholeheartedly. I always have a reason. Patrick, you are a threat, and I generally identify you as threat priority A1. So you must be eliminated, my friend. You have unintended consequences. Your empathy has cost me games. Your unwillingness to take out an inferior opponent has literally cost me games before. So, like, you, my friend, you must be destroyed.
I don't know if I buy that anymore. You just enjoy boning me at any possible chance you get to bone me.
Yeah, well, it's kind of my thing, Patrick. You know, we've been friends for a long time. We've been friends through it, so I think you like it.
It's been a while. I honestly miss it a little bit. So
yeah,
maybe.
You're like, not to foreshadow anything, but you're like all the ladies in Conan. Like, you just, you know, the same thing just keeps happening again and again.
You just want to hold my supple, lithe body up against, you know, your
thews, whatever the
muscles.
thews are. Oh, great. First swear, 4 minutes in. Great.
It wasn't me.
And Pat is always wearing, like, silken garments that are almost see-through. And then we'll just, like, at a moment's notice, just take them off for no reason. So, yeah.
Well, it's because he lives in Florida, dude. So it's hot down there.
It's true.
Pat, I'm surprised you're wearing anything right now. Are you wearing, like, your Dragon Ball shorts with that shirt?
I'm so hot right now. I had to, like, turn off we have window-mounted AC, and I had to turn it off in this room so it just, like, wouldn't, overwhelm the audio feed. And it's, man, but it's probably 86 out there right now.
You live in an inhospitable land, my friend. Ow. Cat just bit me. Burns, you've been playing Claire Obscure Expedition 33 for a game club segment. Are you ready to declare it the greatest game of all time, the GOAT?
I mean, I've only played a couple of hours so far.
So yes, I'm hearing a yes.
No, there's still a lot of games that I have to play in order for me to say anything declarative about it. I will say, though, that I do have a few hot takes that are percolating. And so we'll see how that all continues as I make my way through more of the game. Because I don't want to say anything unless, if something changes, halfway through the game and it changes my opinion of something. But, it's the internet. It's been fascinating watching the internet's reaction to this, in many different ways. And so, I'm really curious to see how the game continues to go. I'm having a lot of fun with it so far. I can say that. So
yeah, it's the game of a generation, easily. I did an exercise on ChatGPT today. I tried to get ChatGPT to make an image of Mael and Shadowheart holding hands and looking lovingly at each other. And if you can guess the connection between them, go ahead.
You know what Mael's age is, right, Tom?
24, right?
No.
Oh.
No.
Well, that's a horrifying thing. So now we'll just strike out.
I'm curious.
Oh, well, I had the 4 right. Great. Well, that's horrifying.
No. 16. She is 16.
Oh, I thought you were holding up a 1 and a 4. Well, yeah, that's more Pat's territory than mine. Am I right, Patrick?
She's 31. My beautiful gal is 31 years old. Mike, how old are you? I know you touched on you saw Star Wars in theaters. How old are you?
What year is it now? I'm 54, I think.
Oh, wow.
I still don't remember what year it is by now, so that should tell you something.
You had to break out the abacus to get that answer.
Yeah.
Well, now
That's how old he is. He knows how to use an abacus.
Interesting. How old is Shadowheart? Like, if Mael's supposed to be 16, how old is Shadowheart?
I mean, I don't know. She's an adult, though, I'm pretty sure. I guess I could be wrong. I don't know that they ever really mentioned it in Baldur's Gate 3.
Well, that's interesting, the connection. And, like, I was really drawn to Mael, and I'm like, why is this character so intriguing to me? And I looked up who the voice actor is. It's the same voice actress for Shadowheart, who I absolutely adored in Baldur's Gate 3, and Mael in Expedition 33. So that was a tangible... It was going to a tangible place, just took the creepiest possible road to get there. And with that, I think it's time to talk about a big old barbarian dude.
Conan wouldn't care about... There was no age of consent in Conan, so what does it matter by Crom?
No age of consent, but there was a brief mention of consent. That was a redeeming value. Before we launch into Conan, thank you to our sponsor, Premier Health. Check out their website at premierhealthmn.com. That's Premier Health, MN as in Minnesota.com. And if you enjoy our content, please support the show at patreon.com/OiO. That's patreon.com/OiO. Follow us on social. Email the show at overratedpod@gmail.com. That's overratedpod@gmail.com. Follow Burns at HobbyBoxBurns on X and twitch.tv/HobbyBoxBurns. Patrick, you didn't write your handles in here? I don't know them off the top of my head.
It's at Pat DeGeest on everything.
Oh, well, that's really difficult to remember. DeGeest, DeGeest. 1 E, then 2 E's. Yeah. At Pat DeGeest on everything. You can also follow the show at facebook.com/outside-is-overrated. So today we're focusing our discussion around The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian by Robert E. Howard. The book collects 13 short stories along with various miscellanea. This collection aggregates the Conan stories in rough publication order. It is not a chronological telling of his adventures. The OiO community actually chose this book over the likes of a classic Star Wars tale, new and old books about the video game economics, and the sci-fi classic Neuromancer. Patrick, you were influential. We talked about a lot of books that we were going to put on this vote for the community for a long time. Where did you come in on our book choice?
I'm glad we ended up with Conan, whatever we're going with. Conan and Neuromancer were my top 2 choices, and I've already read Neuromancer. If people haven't, I highly recommend it. It's a really great book. It's predicts a lot of things that happen, in current times, where the internet would go, things like that. So I recommend that, but I would have read it again. It was also nice to get exposed to something new.
Yeah, Bernsey, what about you?
I mean, I don't know. The vote felt like it was a decade ago at this point. How am I supposed to remember what all I voted for? I do remember that Conan was one of the things I voted on, so I was happy to get that voted in.
I'm glad it was such an impassioned decision for you. What about you, Mike?
Well, I voted for Neuromancer, to be honest, but I'll always read Conan happily. So I had zero issue with the turnout as being Conan, because you can dip into those stories at any time and find something to enjoy. They hold up amazingly well for their age. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, until I savage them at the end of the show, but that's just a little bit of foreshadowing. I was pulling for Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn. I'm a big Timothy Zahn fan, and I love me some Thrawn, so that was the one that I was secretly hoping for. But the nice thing about putting together the list that we vote on, it was all stuff that I wanted to read to some degree. So, Heir to the Empire and Neuromancer would have been my choices. Bernsey, you were an English teacher in a past life. Was Conan a staple of your curriculum or what?
It definitely wasn't. I was trying to think before the podcast about what would be the closest thing to Conan the Barbarian that I would have taught in any of our curricula, and the closest thing I can think of, and it's not really like it at all, is The Most Dangerous Game. There just isn't. I don't remember a lot of fantasy ever being part of the curriculum at any places that I taught. There was sci-fi at times, like you'd get Bradbury in there and some other things like that, but I don't really remember a lot of actual fantasy that would be stuff that I taught in high school.
Well, it's interesting. Pat, I assume you had the same experience that I did with Mr. Fornes?
No, I did not have Fornes.
You didn't have Fornes? You didn't get to read The Hobbit in high school?
I read The Hobbit with Dave... No. Cook. Mr. Cook. I read The Hobbit with Cook.
Okay, so in the mean streets of Mora, Minnesota, population 3,400, we read The Hobbit as part of our high school curriculum.
Oh, yeah.
Mike, what about you? Did you have any fantasy in your high school literature days?
The only thing that I can remember that would fall into that category would be A Wizard of Earthsea. We did read one year in a class.
Yeah, that's really
Otherwise,
iconic, right? Who was the author on Wizard of Earthsea?
Ursula Le Guin? Le Guin?
Yeah, I think she was on the list of things that I pared down. Sorry, Burns, you wanted to bring up a point?
No, I was just going to say, I read The Hobbit in high school also, but it was, in 9th grade, we had to read a novel, and it was a list of 70 different things that we could choose from, and everybody had to, in our class, not the entire, grade, but in our class, everybody had to choose something different, and I chose The Hobbit and read that for that. But as actual, things that were in there, there's lots of Shakespeare, not a lot of fantasy.
Sure. So I'm sure we all came in with preconceptions about what exactly Conan was. I'd never read the books before. Bernsey, what were you expecting out of the character Conan the Barbarian?
We all have, because I think, well, maybe not for Mike, but I know for most people my age, our first our first experience with Conan the Barbarian was Arnold Schwarzenegger. So that was ultimately who I was thinking about and the characterization that I was thinking about coming into reading it. And I'm thankful that it's a little bit different than that, or at least comes off a little bit different reading the stories that we did. I did have this really weird situation with the first couple of stories where I kept viewing Conan O'Brien as Conan when they would be talking about him, because I've been watching a lot of clips of Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend on YouTube, and so it's just every time I see the word Conan, that face and head just pops into my mind, which is not described anywhere like that for Conan the Barbarian, but it just threw me for a little bit for a loop. I had to train myself off of that as I continued reading.
That is quite the association. Mike, you had already had some association with Conan the Barbarian, right? What were your expectations for the character coming back to these stories for this show?
I've reread these stories multiple times over the years, so it was more just I kind of wanted to come in and just see how well I remembered them, and my expectation was I'd remember it pretty well, and actually there were things I did not remember as well as I thought I did, so I was surprised at that, honestly. But, I didn't expect to be surprised by too much.
Interesting. And Patrick, what were your preconceptions for the character?
I was kind of in the same boat as Joey, where I had never read a single story. I had seen a couple of the 80s movies back in the day. I legit expected it to be perhaps the origin of the male power fantasy in a negative way that gets talked about a lot these days, which is like he's just pure strength, he solves everything through violence, and then he just bones chicks.
Yeah.
Wash, rinse, and repeat.
It sounds like a good time. I mean, I've never seen the Conan movies. Surprise, surprise. So, I didn't really know anything about Conan. I'd never read the stories. I'd never seen the movies. I was familiar with Schwarzenegger, like a movie poster of Schwarzenegger as Conan. So, that was a visual that was in my head. But I just assumed he'd be this big, burly dude who hit everything hard. I thought overall the stories were going to be more Game of Thrones and less H.P. Lovecraft. That was a bit of a surprise for me. But as I was reading, what I really realized that I was expecting Superman. I was expecting this big burly dude who was impervious to pain and could destroy anything. And instead I got more stone cold Steve Austin.
It's funny that you mentioned H.P. Lovecraft, because he was one of the blurbs in the book. Was him sort of extolling the virtues of Robert E. Howard, and he also
they were friends.
Yeah, he was also friends with him. Yeah, and they had correspondence over letters a lot back and forth. So I think that's an interesting connection. It makes sense because a lot of the horror aspects. Not that I've read, I don't think any real Lovecraft. Maybe one short story over time, but there are some similarities to that style of horror in some of the stories that we read.
I mean, Mike might touch on this in a second, but yeah, he seems very influenced by Lovecraft. Lovecraft is just constantly, ancient gods from space or from the pits of the earth that appeared through some cult incantation, and then a lone group of heroes have to stop them from ending the world. But yeah, I was surprised to find out too that they were buddies, and they were wrote each other letters just constantly, and it shows.
But it's interesting. They had very different personalities, and so there were people that have gone through their letters. They debated a lot about what was important, civilization versus kind of primeval barbarism, we'll call it. And as you can guess, Lovecraft was on one side and Howard was on the other. Mm-hmm. But their writing did influence each other, and you can absolutely see the Lovecraft influence in the more fantastical elements of these stories. Mm-hmm. And it's even more so in some of the other non-Conan stories that he did, where you can see that Lovecraft influence very strongly.
Well, Mike, as we were preparing for this show, you mentioned that we should touch on Conan from a historical sense, looking at where fantasy and pulp fiction was at the time. To that end, I asked my best friend ChatGPT to explain where Howard ranked in the timeline of fantasy culture, and this is what I learned. This is going to be a bit of a monologue. Sorry. Hang on, guys. Before Conan the Barbarian debuted in Weird Tales in 1932, fantasy literature leaned heavily on myth, fairy tales, and poetic high fantasy. Authors like William Morris, Lord Dunsany, and E.R. Edison crafted elegant, dreamlike worlds filled with gods and ancient magic, but their stories often moved at a stately pace and catered to literary tastes. Then came Robert E. Howard. While other fantasy authors were writing about distant, refined realms, Howard brought us the Hyborian Age, a brutal, earthy world filled with thieves, monsters, empires, and magic. Through Conan, Howard created a new kind of hero, brawny, cunning, morally gray, and driven by survival, desire, and a personal code rather than destiny. Publishing alongside H.P. Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith, Howard helped define the tone of Weird Tales. But while Lovecraft went cosmic and Smith went decadent, Howard went primal. His stories were fast, visceral, and full of pulp energy. He wasn't just writing fantasy, he was inventing sword and sorcery, and he did it before Tolkien ever published The Hobbit. In short, before Howard, fantasy was lofty, poetic, and mythic. But with Howard, fantasy got sweaty, savage, and thrilling. Howard didn't just contribute to fantasy literature, he hacked out an entirely new subgenre with a broadsword. Given your experience with these 13 stories, Mike, are you at all surprised by the impact that Howard made on the genre?
No. To be fair, I think ChatGPT probably skipped one important influence that predates Howard, which is Tarzan. Tarzan and the other related characters absolutely were a huge influence on Conan, so that should have come up, but I guess ChatGPT didn't get that far back. But no, because what Howard was doing was he was creating a fantasy world that was based on our real world in a historical attempt sense, where he created a back history, which we're all used to that now. Everybody does a back history for the fantasy world. Everybody does it. But before Conan, that was pretty much unknown. And he did this whole long history document of all these countries and rise and fall of nations and peoples. And then threw his characters in a certain time period of that. And it makes it feel so much more grounded and real and alive than anything you mentioned Edison and Dunsany. They are much more ethereal and, fantasy, where Conan feels so much more alive and real because of the way Howard approached it.
Well, that's interesting. And, I'm going to jump in with my point here, and then I'll pivot to either Pat or Joey. But I thought each one of the stories that we read, each of the 13 that I read, was fine in its own regard. I thought there was generally a pretty consistent quality across all of them, and I enjoyed them all. But it's hard to believe that any of them on their own would change an entire genre. It's hard to see, any one of these short stories becoming so iconic that it created a new subgenre of fantasy.
Well, and I think the difficulty with that, though, is it's, 90 years into the future, it's really hard to gauge what that impact was back when it happened, especially if we haven't read a lot of, those types of things that were published back in those days. And I think, sort of hearkening back to one of my earlier points, seeing as how, fantasy isn't really included in school curricula, and it's not just in secondary education, but also when you look into higher education also. I mean, that's just not part of what is put together for curriculum, and so it gets left out of, except for a few examples, Tolkien being one of them, and I would say Edgar Rice Burroughs with Tarzan is probably another one of those, although that's not as fantasy as much as it is based sort of in reality, but it's kind of a more primal part of reality. But there's not a lot of fantasy, even current day, that gets included anywhere near a classic, classic literature, stuff that everybody needs to read, which is funny because sci-fi, that seems to happen a lot more with, which it's so weird to look at what ends up being clumped kind of in there and considered those things, and then what just sort of is left off on its own.
Patrick, we've had the opportunity on this show to discuss a couple of Robert E. Heinlein novels, Stranger in a Strange Land and Starship Troopers, which we both loved. Which author do you think had a bigger impact on sci-fi? Heinlein with his many, many novels that he wrote, or Robert E. Howard with his collections of short stories that were published in Pulp Fiction?
It's tough, man. I found myself struggling to figure out the impact. When I think of fantasy, this is legit what I think of. It's swords and sorcery, and I'm reading these stories, and every one individually, I'm like, okay, this is pretty good. It's not groundbreaking, but then I'm thinking okay, this would be a good D&D adventure. And then the next one, I think this would be a good D&D adventure. And D&D is what I think of. This, I feel like this created D&D, and this came out 40 years before Dungeons and Dragons was invented. And so this is just what I think of as fantasy. So I assume that's a pretty good influence if, in 2025 I still think of what Howard created as kind of what is the definition of fantasy and sword and sorcery.
Mike, did you have a point that you wanted to layer on there?
Yeah, just to kind of put a cap on this, I think important thing to point, these stories, why they were popular, it was kind of a slow burn because, even in the days of the pulps, Conan was popular, but he was not as popular as even, say, The Shadow or The Phantom or Doc Savage. We're all contemporaries. But long after those were forgotten, there was an underground swelling of fantasy interest from certain sectors, and there were guys like L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter who kept the memory of Howard alive in the way that August Derleth did with H.P. Lovecraft. And there were fanzines. I mean, I hate to admit this, it really nerds me out, but I once subscribed to a Conan fanzine when I was a teenager.
That's awesome.
It was still being done when I was a kid, and that was many years later than, the 30s. And then D&D is the other one. I'm glad you mentioned that, because Conan the Barbarian is everything that started the barbarian class in D&D, and Conan's stories are so influential to the original, start of D&D. That's the other big thing, is the rise of D&D lifted up the Conan stories along with them. It absolutely did. That's what led a lot of people to these stories, was playing D&D.
That's interesting, the symbiosis between the two. Well, I want to dive into more of the aspects of specific stories, but first we're going to take a quick break for a note from our sponsor, Premier Health.
Well, I wanted to mention, we were talking about, being a barbarian and playing a barbarian before the recording, me and Tom were the other day. And I said, playing around as a barbarian is a good way to hurt yourself. If you grab a piece of wood and start swinging around like a club, you can, splinter a sternum, crack your coccyx, fracture a fibula. All the alliterative injuries can happen. And then you need to get some medical help.
And when those alliterative injuries do happen, you should check out Premier Health. They have solutions for back pain, neck knocks, car crashes, and other alliterative-related injuries, and more. We suggest seeing Dr. Brian Camille in Golden Valley, Minnesota, or Dr. Kelsey Camille in Coon Rapids. Learn more at premierhealthmn.com. That's premierhealthmn.com. So now that we're all healthy and feeling well, I wanted to talk more about the stories that we read for this show. So Patrick, we'll start with you on this one. Out of the 13 stories in the coming of Conan the Cimmerian, which stood out to you?
I gotta go with Scarlet Citadel, Tom. I'm taking that with pick number 1, man. That was my favorite one by far. It had like every single element that I want in a fantasy or sword and sorcery thing. I don't know if you want me to break it down, but there's an epic army battle at the beginning. Conan is summoned to help defend the realm from this invading army. He's backstabbed. The guy who summoned him, turns out it was just a trap that he's laying for Conan. So Conan gets captured by the evil general and some evil wizard. So they throw him in like the wizard's dungeon. And, Conan has to escape the dungeon. There's giant snakes in there. There are, weird monster creatures in there. He's got to break out of prison, re-equip himself. Now he's got to somehow catch up with his this army that is invading his homeland. And there's basically maybe the origin of the Eagles in Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. Like, he finds a friendly wizard who just like summons a flying creature to, so Conan can get home and rally the troops and defend his realm. So I just thought it had everything that I like in a fantasy story.
I don't know that you'd really want to call him a friendly wizard. It was a wizard who also hated the wizard that imprisoned Conan.
Yeah.
And so it's
enemy
like,
my enemy.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend type of thing. But yeah.
Yeah, that was my favorite by far, man.
Yeah.
I mean, armies and people moved around so quickly in that world like it was the last season of Game of Thrones, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
That was a pretty good jam. Burnsy, what was your favorite?
So I think my favorite was Black Colossus. So I enjoy, as we've talked about at times, I think on the podcast, I'm pretty sure I have at some point, I enjoy playing fantasy-based tabletop miniature war games. And the strategy aspects of the massive battle in the second half of that story just really sort of tapped into sort of that rank and flank kind of battle, and an army commander trying to get the advantage over an overwhelming swarm of troops coming at them. And so that aspect I really enjoyed of this. But I also think the early aspects of the story and how it sort of delves a lot more into the gods within the world, I think was interesting, and it was sort of nice to have as sort of this separate layer as you then got into the chaos of the battle at the second half of the story.
And for a lot of that, I'm with you. I enjoyed a lot of the same elements of the story that you did, but where it fell off for me was the climax. And spoiler alert for a story that is nearly 100 years old, let's say 92 years old, spoilers. This particular climax, Conan just chucks his sword at the big bad and impales him, and it's like the end. It's like, oh, well, that's kind of a letdown. Like, there's a lot of interesting closure on a lot of the stories, and I'm just like, really? Just chucks his sword at him? Like, were you on a deadline, Howard? Like, that's a
Probably.
bummer.
Had to
Patrick,
get it in the mail pretty quickly.
Patrick, you can pile on, and then Burns, you can rebut us.
Well, what's the longest one-on-one fight that Conan has in anything we've read? He kills most of his enemies in one swing. Occasionally, it's 2 or 3.
There's the
That's like one of my favorite things, though.
the Devil in Iron. Like, he has to run away from the Colossus, and like he has to escape and like find the knife, and then like get outside, and then so that's probably the longest climax. But I'd say that's the outlier out of all the stories. Like, I'm with Burns. Like, I generally like how like it's building up and then whop. But for some reason, just chucking his sword at the dude didn't resonate with me. I actually wrote down on my notes that it was the most disappointing climax to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that was probably a weakness of Black Colossus, because especially, like, before that, how he's, like, getting away on this chariot that's being, like, helmed by this creature, and all of a sudden, they just throws them, like, the girl that he's chasing and the bad guy off of the chariot for some reason, and you're just like, okay, I guess, whatever. It makes it easier for Conan to catch him, I guess.
No ticket.
No ticket. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. But otherwise, I liked a lot of those other aspects of the Black Colossus, so that's why that one stood out to me.
Yeah, like the dude like terrorizing her through her dreams. That was pretty cool. That was a pretty cool concept.
Yeah.
Mike, which of the stories stood out to you?
My favorite in this collection was Tower of the Elephant. I've always had a fondness for that because it's a lot more, it starts out as a normal Conan story, but it becomes very dreamlike and unreal and kind of strange, near the end of the climax when he meets the creature in the tower and he, kills it, which frees its spirit, and then it takes care of the, sorcerer. And it just, I don't know if you know this, but Howard started trying to write poetry and found out, like so many people have, that you can't make any money writing poetry. But his poetry writing really helped his Conan writing and all his other writing because it gave him a sense of language and cadence, I think, that really helped him. And it shows, especially in a story like Tower of the Elephant, near the end, I believe.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the most creative stories for sure. Patrick?
Oh, and I mentioned before, like, the kind of defining characteristics of the male power fantasy is just solving everything through violence. But, like, one of the things that was surprising to me is just how, like, stealthy and roguelike Conan was. Like, I think that was probably his preferred method. And then when stuff went Tom, he busted out the sword,
And when Tom went Tom, he went full Tom mode, yeah.
Yeah.
I think he preferred to do things stealthy, and it was fun because he's talking about, there are sheer walls that are 20 feet high or whatever, and he's just like, well, I can easily scale this wall, and I'm just worried about what's on the other side. Like, things like that were fun, He didn't just go in sword swinging.
And what I appreciated out of this story, it actually had one of my favorite moments across all of the stories. What I appreciated was Conan's problem solving in this, because there's a scene, again, spoiler alert, but he's fighting a spider, and like there's a spider in this generally treasure room. There's sofas and treasures all over the place, and he's fighting the spider, and the spider's laying its web everywhere, and it's becoming more and more difficult to maneuver. Like, it's trapped in the web, and he's like, oh, crap, well, this is it. And so he does the only thing he can think of. He picks up a treasure chest and chucks it, and it smashes the spider. I'm like, oh, I like that resolution. Like, this is great. I am in. And it was like the second story. I'm like, these are good. I'm having fun.
Yeah, he didn't need the Light of the Elves MacGuffin like those stupid hobbits needed. Just give me something heavy to chuck. That's all I need.
If Shelob had killed Frodo, that would have been a much better story. Because like Shelob kills Frodo. All right, well, Samwise picks up the ring. He trucks to Mordor. He goes boop. Heroes win, and like nobody's pissed off at Frodo for all time. Like, it would have been a much more satisfying conclusion. And then like would have been like, oh, well, Frodo literally sacrificed everything. He didn't walk all the way there, like wring every ounce of life out of his friends that he could to get all the way to the end and say, nah, I'm just not gonna do it. I changed my mind, guys.
mean, they're probably going to reboot the story every 20 years, so like you should become a director and submit your script or something.
Yeah, I'm on it. LOTR the way it should be. My favorite out of the stories was Rogues in the House. Because I thought it was a little bit different from the other stories. Like, generally, there's a formula that we'll talk about in just a little bit, but in this particular story, there's two political scumbags on opposite ends of the spectrum. Conan's hired as an assassin by one of them to kill the other one, and they all get trapped in a dungeon together by an ape. And it's like, oh, well, what's going to happen with these three enemies, like, forced to work together? And I thought that was really interesting. I thought the climax played out pretty well in that one, and I just liked Rogues in the House because it felt like a little bit outside of the regular formula for me.
You wouldn't know because you don't watch movies, but they borrowed a chunk of that climax for the second Conan movie with Schwarzenegger.
Interesting. I would like to see Thak in somewhat real life. I imagine it's a big dopey suit, not soup.
Well,
the antagonist is soup.
The guy who throws the big guy who throws people off the. Well, actually, the big guy from all the Indiana Jones movies, the big guy Indy fights.
I've seen him, but I don't. It's been so long since I've seen Indiana Jones. I can't recall.
That's the actor who's in the monster suit in the Conan movie.
Oh, funny.
Awesome. One thing that I'm surprised out of 13 stories, 4 favorites chosen, Queen of the Black Coast was not amongst them. For me, it was a difficult choice between Queen of the Black Coast, where Conan's a pirate with his love. Oh, what's her name? I didn't write it down. Belit,
yeah.
I thought that was a pretty cool story. Surprised that it didn't rank at the top for any of us. So, the basic formula for these stories is Conan, plus ancient ruins, plus supernatural horror, plus damsel in distress. Burns, out of all of these stories, 13 stories that we read, what was your favorite supernatural moment or supernatural horror across these stories?
So, I think I'm going to lean back on Black Colossus again, because I like how how Howard built up the antagonist, which was this supernatural, like, ages-old being that was in hibernation, and starts basically with a thief going into this pyramid, basically, this temple, and then unleashing it. And then you go to the princess who ends up getting, like, accosted by it and told that he was going to come and get her, and she would be, his queen, basically, as he goes through to rule the world, take over the world, and run the world. And then it, goes to when they're in the battle, there's the fog that's sort of seeping in. And, from an ironic standpoint, you kind of understand as the reader, oh yeah, well, this is of course hiding their army that's going to pop up there. And so it's just all these different aspects kind of built up. The one thing I think that is unfortunate with that is, like you had said before, Tom, the ending. I really wish there would have been a little bit more of that supernatural aspect to the fight that Conan had to sort of overcome, as it kind of just sort of had like a really quick like ramp up and drop down in that one. But I really liked sort of the way that it built up the supernatural aspects within that, but the whole story wasn't just supernatural stuff, which was that's what kind of was the downfall of the Queen of the Black Coast for me, was that it got super muddy trying to understand what was going on at aspects of that. Because you had the dream sequence and that made sense, but then after that, it was just so many things were described so similarly that it made it hard to sort of understand. And the pictures in the collection that we had helped a little bit to get an idea of what was being described. But I think that was sort of the letdown of that story and why the supernatural stuff in there didn't land with me as much.
Well, the Queen of the Black Coast, that entire story functions to set up the punchline that she comes back from the grave to save Conan. And I thought that was one of the most impactful supernatural moments across these stories. So I agree. There was definitely muddiness in that story, but I thought that punchline was just so powerful that it compensated for a lot of that for me. You were so much more thoughtful in your answer than me, my friend. Like, when I originally thought through this answer, I'm like, when those two wizards fought and Conan cut off the one wizard's head, like, then the body goes chasing after it. That was pretty good.
That was good, too.
it's like, oh yeah, they're just the body's gonna run for eternity after the eagle pulling the head. That was great. So Mike, what was your favorite of the supernatural elements?
I think was there the one called The Devil in Iron? Where what I liked about that, it was the classic, descended demon/god of an ancient age gets awoken, and then when the fisherman steals the knife that was holding him bound. But what I really liked was he recreates the dead city just because he wants to, have his past back around him. So by force of will, he recreates all these dead people in the dead city, but it only exists because of his will. And Conan wanders through and meets people who are, they realize in their minds that they were killed, but they're not quite sure what happened to them because they're not really alive.
And with you bringing up that city in particular, I wanted to bring up a couple of things that were recurring themes throughout the stories that I just thought was odd. Like, there was a lot of green stone used in a lot of these cities throughout as, like, identifying, like, characteristic of their building. And there were a lot of snakes throughout all of these stories. Like, the serpent was a major figure, and there was a giant snake in that one as well. So I thought that story was interesting as well, but it was... I don't know why it stuck with me, the stone and the snakes so much.
Yeah, the
well, in the
snake
Western
stuck with
world
me as well.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what happened to him in his childhood, but yeah. Like, Giant Snake was that may be the prototypical villain of Howard is the Giant Snake. It's in half the stories, I feel like.
Outside of the snakes, Patrick, what was your most noteworthy supernatural element across the stories?
I don't know what it's called. I call it the pseudo-toad. And going back to the snakes, this is one of the things he encountered in the dungeon of Scarlet Citadel. And it was like the fourth or fifth story I had read, and I kept thinking, okay, back to giant snakes. He just keeps having a giant snake as the worst thing Conan encounters. Like, I know this is the origin of sword and sorcery, but open up your mind a little bit. Where are the monsters? Where's the crazy stuff? And then here it was. He's trapped in the dungeon. He's trying to escape with no light. He doesn't know his way out. He sees the snake, and then he this toad thing is making human noises. He goes towards it, and it realizes it's not a human. It's got a toad head and like a amoeba-like body with kind of pseudopod tentacle things, and he just flees, which is so anti-Conan like in my experience. And they actually has a statement where he's like, I would rather face the giant snake than abominations like this. And I was finally just like, yes, okay, there's some ridiculous monsters and stuff entering the storyline. So I got really excited. That was one of the things I had felt was missing the first 4 or 5 stories, so I was happy to see it.
Yeah, and then he does end up fighting that abomination, and that was pretty interesting as well. Mm-hmm. We have talked about a lot of positives from the stories. Let's talk about female characters. The female characters in these 13 Conan stories often fall into familiar pulp tropes. Did any of the female characters, there's one in just about every story, did any of them break the mold or leave any kind of an impression on you? Mike, we'll start with you.
I mean, if you're looking for female characters with a lot of agency and individuality, 1930s pulps are probably not the place to be, unfortunately. I guess the closest one is, what was her name, Olivia or Octavia?
Olivia.
From The Devil in Iron, I believe. Because she did something. It was off camera, you didn't see it, but she at least did something. She escaped on her own and ends up on the island in the process of escaping. So at least she was taking action for herself, which, is actually more than most of the characters are allowed to do, frankly. And Belit, at least, she was definitely a character with her own agency and her own mind and will, but, as soon as she saw Conan, that's all her mind and will was about, pretty much.
Right. That was the unfortunate thing about Belit, is that it was like she obviously had to have had some level of, independence and ability to sort of fight or whatever, because she wouldn't have been, the head of a pirate crew if that wasn't the case. But then it's the moment that Conan's injected into that story, she's immediately either infatuated with him, or then infatuated with riches, or then dead. It's there's nothing else that really happens with her. And the thing that was interesting to me was, Tom, you said that all of these stories tend to have a woman in them, but actually the first few didn't. Because the first few stories that were in the book, they were chronologically as he wrote them. They didn't really have female characters in there at all. It was mostly just Conan doing man things, and other men would be around. And then it wasn't until Belit, I think, was kind of the first female character in one of these stories. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. I almost wonder if, to some extent, that was like some sort of editorial notes from the guy in Weird Tales. It's like, hey, you gotta get some female in there so that there's a little bit of titillation for the people that are reading. All these other people are doing it in the pulps. You should do it too.
They need something to put on the cover.
Well, that too.
That was a lot of it. Is they wanted to be able to put a scantily clad woman on the cover. And to do that, your cover story had to have a woman in it who was scantily clad.
Fascinating. And that's a good observation, Burns, because Queen of the Black Coast was the 6th story out of 13 that we read, if we read the collection in order. So that is very interesting. Then I believe all the rest of the stories from then on had female characters. And Mike, I think you were referring to Natala in Pool of the Black One. She was the captain's prize that snuck off the boat and wound up rousing all the pirates while Conan distracted the giant.
Her too, but I was thinking
dudes.
of the other one more. But I mean, she did a little too. I'll give her some credit, but still, they're not given much to do really, other than be somebody for Conan to rescue and carry around.
Yeah, Patrick, any thoughts?
This feels like further evidence that we're not quite sure which woman was which from which story. but yeah, mine was Olivia. There wasn't Olivia and there wasn't Octavia. I hope I got the right one. Olivia from Iron Shadows of the Moon. She was the one who, she was with the story from start to finish. Like Conan finds her in the swamp and they kind of team up from there on out. And they encounter a pirate gang. Conan gets, he's perhaps in consideration for captain, but gets tied up. And she manages to save him. She cuts his ropes and, he does his Conan stuff.
Yeah, so I guess I undersold the role of females in these stories. Like, there's at least a couple examples out of the 7 stories that had female characters. They weren't all pulp tropes, so great. I'm glad that we talked that out. Good job, guys.
Legit, like, I expected it to be worse, honestly. I thought there would be some pretty frequent Conan sex scenes, I guess, and they were all pretty tasteful, like fade to black. Like, by the end, the damsel in distress realizes he's a great guy and he's a hero, and she falls in love with him. And at that point, they start making out end scene.
Well, and that's
pretty much.
I was gonna say that's probably the movie sort of giving you expectations.
Yeah.
Because I rewatched Conan the Barbarian for the first time in probably 3 decades, maybe 2.5 decades. While we were prepping for this, and that was the thing that sort of struck out to me was like the first 3 women he meets, it's really basically just from like a sexual perspective. But then there's also Valyria within that, who is a relatively strong female character and can fight basically as not as well as Conan, but can fight as well as the other guy that was with them. And so I actually thought that was surprising after reading these stories, that it's like, okay, this was actually a really strong kind of female character that was depicted within the movie. And so that was surprising to me.
Yeah, I should watch that movie. Patrick?
It's an experience.
Patrick, we've been friends for a long time, and I am comfortable saying on mic that you are the most masculine person that I know. Conan is often described as the pinnacle of the male power fantasy. Having read these 13 stories now, is it fair to say that he is more or less your kindred spirit?
This is the weirdest question I've ever had to answer on here, Tom, is why... How you think I'm masculine and related to Conan?
Well, it's because you framed the question in our text chain. I was just trying to serve it up on a platter for you, but you can make it weird. Would you rather talk about your testicles? We've covered that ground.
I feel like I'm quite the opposite of Conan, man. Like, he's got a mane of hair, a long flowing mane of hair, If your listeners have not seen me, I'm bald as a young baby. I'm bald as a newborn babe coming out of his mother's womb. If we're gonna overuse the similes that Howard likes to use, go ahead.
Well, sure. Let's reframe the question then. We came into the show with the expectation that Conan was the typical male power fantasy. Has your perspective changed having read 13 of these stories?
Yeah. I've sort of touched on it a bit. I was more impressed. He was more cerebral than I expected. There was more planning involved than I expected. He was less rapey than I expected. Conan's generally about consent. I thought. It's called The Coming of Conan of Cimmerian. I thought that might be a double entendre, but no, he and it's kind of expected, in like almost a James Bond way, where like, yeah, they're just gonna fall in love with him, and there will be a new woman in the next story. But I don't know. I thought it'd be more explicit, and he wouldn't care. And he's increased my impression of what I thought Conan would be.
And Mike and Joey, anything you want to add on about how the perception of the male power fantasy and Conan's role in it has shifted or been reaffirmed by these stories?
Well, I mean, there's power fantasy here. There's no getting around it. But, Conan's not trying to be the alpha male. He just Conan wants to have a good life. He wants to drink a lot of, booze. He wants to, find a lot of beautiful women. And he wants to enjoy himself in life. That's all he's about. He's not trying to dominate anybody or get any pleasure. He's never a bully. He's never trying to hurt people just for fun. If he can get by through life and, get what he wants relatively easily, he does it. He steals because that's the only way he knows how to get what he wants, which is some money so he can buy some booze and, find some women.
And I think it's interesting, like, he always finds himself, like, he walks into these different situations and he'll get bored with his situation and he'll move on, but he always rises to the top in every situation that he's in. He's so exceptional at fighting, that he always rises to the cream of the crop and finds himself at the center of the action. I think that's interesting, and it's not like he always comes in from a position of power.
So, and I do think I agree with Pat in that it's not the same as what you would envision with Arnold Schwarzenegger barely being able to speak English. Like, there's multiple times where Conan is portrayed as very loquacious, and especially I think one of my favorite depictions of him was in The Pool of the Black One, where he is basically he swims onto a pirate ship that's in the middle of the sea, and then pops up on board. And it's like, this is the most like affable I think that Conan is depicted in any of the stories leading up to that point, where it's just like he's like killing the crew with kindness basically, and sure, he has to punch this one guy, but he knows after he punches that guy, everybody's going to give him a chance. And then every time that because you're watching a lot of that story from the female's perspective, a lot of the time when she's watching him, he's joking around with the crew, chatting them up, and obviously you find out when you get a little bit of a peek into Conan's brain that the whole point of that was to win the favor of the crew so that he could kill the pirate captain and become the captain himself. That's now the third time in these stories it becomes a pirate captain. So what happened to all these other people in between things? It's probably not great to be on Conan's pirate crew. I don't know.
Well, he does say that you can always find another crew. Like, it's just, they're just hirelings. Overall, I really like Conan as a character. There were times when he fled in terror. There were times when he had creative solutions to problems. As much as I liked him, there were issues that drug these stories down. And one of the biggest ones for me, kind of a bummer to like wrap up our discussion on, but I didn't like the not so subtle racism, because nearly every enemy race throughout the stories has dark skin. It's described as ebony, but it's just, man, that doesn't jive, and like it brings the whole experience down for me. Like, it's not okay that black people are the enemy. So,
well, and it's like he falls into that so much that there was a time in one of the stories, I can't remember which one it was, where it's like, there are these big black creatures, but they weren't like Negroes. And I specifically said that. They're like unhuman. And it's just like, Oh, like, but it's a different time, and so at a certain point, you can't completely belabor them for things of the time, and I think it's a lot easier to criticize Howard's writing for that than I think maybe how much more of a stretch it seems to be for people ragging on Tolkien for the orcs are just black people and he hates black people and blah blah blah, which I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about Tolkien to really know if that's true, but that feels like people are sort of projecting onto that a little bit more so than this. And I guess also I don't know enough about the writing of that time in pulp fiction to know if that was just a lot of how kind of things were structured at that point. But yeah, it is a little unfortunate that permeates through a lot of the stories.
It comes back to his history, his proto-history he created. It really is, it is modern Europe and North Africa and, West Asia is what he's basing it on. And so Conan comes from the northwest of Europe. Mm-hmm. And, the people he's dealing with are in the southeast of Europe or in proto-Asia, proto-North Africa. That's just kind of the visualization that he did. So Stygians are basically Egyptians, and Kushites are basically, Africans. And, I forget all the names, but some of them it's Afghanistan and it's Turkey. All of this is based on those countries. So because he's exploring those areas, those are the people he's encountering. He's not in his native northwestern Europe. That's why except in one of these stories, I think he was, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think the Frost Giant's daughter.
And usually he's exploring further south and east, and that's where he's going to encounter, not white people, because that's where he was.
That's true.
So yeah, and it's true of almost all adventure stories for the pulps, is that Northwestern Europeans were considered the best, and the further you get from Northwestern Europe, the worse it gets, unfortunately. That is not entirely true, but it's 90% true, I think.
Sure. Well, thank you guys for helping me contextualize that, because it was something that was a nagging problem for me throughout the stories, and I didn't know exactly how to bring it up, so I didn't even really insert it as a talking point. I just sprung that on you, and you guys very eloquently addressed it. I appreciate you. We've discussed a number of books on this show now, including Stranger in a Strange Land, Starship Troopers, Sherlock Holmes, The Gunslinger, Harry Potter, Dresden, Congo, The Witcher, and least fortunately of all, The Silmarillion. Joey, is Conan a good time? Is it something that OiO listeners should check out? Should they pick up a collection of stories like The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian?
Yeah, I mean, I think if your only idea of who Conan the Barbarian is from the movies that came out in the early to mid 80s, and you're interested in reading fantasy, like you've read a lot of different fantasy things, I think this is a good way to sort of balance out some of that. A lot of fantasy these days, and just popularly, is high fantasy. And I think working in some low fantasy that's a little bit more gritty and grounded can be interesting. And I say grounded, it's like it still has a lot of supernatural and magical things in it. But it helps balance out kind of the elves, dwarfs, grand wizards and everything like that you end up getting in a lot of other fantasy stories, I think. So I think it's good as a balance and a little bit of a different perspective on things.
I thought it was very interesting in the very first story that there is a very clear correlation drawn between Conan the Barbarian and Robert Baratheon when he's sitting on the throne in Westeros, and the Sword and the Phoenix. Like their mindsets were in very similar places, and I thought it was interesting that this story had such an impact on modernish popular culture. Mike, are these stories something our listeners should check out in 2025?
I mean, I'm obviously a fan. I have been since I was in middle school, so I can't say I can look at it with completely open eyes in that sense, but I think so. If you're at all interested in sword and sorcery and the genesis of the genre, this is really it. Like we talked about, everything that came before was very different. And then if you're just interested in good, solid, pulp-style action-adventure, this is some of the very best that there is. Howard could do action better than almost anybody else from that period, at least that I've read. And, he also had that poet's ear for language that lifted it above. Going back to, say, Tarzan or, John Carter, he was a better writer. And it shows in these Conan stories. They're just better written than a lot of that style of stuff. It really are. So I think they hold up in that sense, too.
Yeah, and I think, his level of popularity is definitely harmed a bit by just the fact that he, only wrote for such a short period of time before,
Yeah.
I mean, he died when he was 36. He didn't get as long and lengthy of a time to create sort of, this body of work that a lot of popular fantasy writers have created over their like right. I mean, a lot of fantasy writers have longer writing careers than he had a life, and so I think that's the other thing that's kind of interesting about Howard, and it is a little tragic because it would have been interesting to see what maybe more he would have created, not just in the Conan universe, but just in fantasy in general, if he had continued to write and then was writing alongside like Tolkien and how Tolkien changed fantasy, to see how he maybe would have spun that. I don't know. I think that would have been fascinating to see and to understand.
I would have loved the Conan story where he chopped off Frodo's head and takes the ring. That would have been the combination, the high fantasy, low fantasy crossover. That would be like right in the Tom area of the Venn diagram.
Conan was too impassioned. He would have completely and totally been subjugated by the ring. I feel like I don't think there's any way that he would have been able to control his passions and not just sort of become, Sauron version 5 or whatever.
Well, what if instead of actually like chopping off Frodo's head and taking the ring and like putting it on and being corrupted, what if like he just sees Sauron standing in Mount Doom, like he picks up Frodo as like a missile and just freaking chucks Frodo at Sauron, misses, goes into the lava, ring's destroyed, Middle-earth is saved.
Like I said, submit your script for the next reboot of Lord of the Rings.
I'm on it. Patrick, is Conan something listeners should pick up in 2025?
Yeah, man. If they want a good fantasy story, I would say yes. I really enjoyed half of these. There was a few that, man, I felt were a grind. But like I said, I grew up on D&D. Over and over, I just thought this is a good D&D tale. In fact, if you're a DM, yes, definitely read some of these stories. They will inspire you. You'll get some adventure ideas out of this.
Well, Patrick, I don't want to put you on the spot too hard, like, at least not on camera, not on mic, but like, what stories lagged for you? Because I thought they were pretty consistently good. Like, I didn't particularly like the end of, I think it was the Black Colossus that we discussed earlier, and the Frost Giant's daughter was a little bit of a low point for me, but other than that, I thought they had a really high, consistent bar of excellence. Like, can you recall any of the ones that fell short for you?
I mean, the Frost Giant's daughter was one. Maybe the first one, something about a bowl. Like, that was almost more of a murder mystery, which might have been
that's
him.
The God in the Bowl. That's actually one of my favorite stories because it's so unusual for a Conan story.
See, I think it was the first one, and I'm just expecting sword fighting and stuff, and he's trying to rob somebody, and they just stand around debating who killed this person, and it was just completely not what I expected, and I thought, well, is he writing this because murder mysteries are popular at the time, or what?
I guess to jump in on something else that Pat said is if you are like a D&D, a dungeon master, and you want to get an idea of how to create a world, I would actually say there's the Hyborian Genesis section of the Conan, or the Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. And that's basically, you get to look at how Howard like wrote and created like the world and how it all comes together. And, I didn't read through all of it, but I read through chunks of it. And that is a good way to, if you are going to create a world that was your own to run a campaign in, I feel like that would be a good way to sort of model off of, is these are the things to think about. These are the types of things to flesh out so that you can sort of permeate that into the story as the players are going through it. And so that was one thing that I thought was really interesting about this collection. On top of just like you get to see a lot of, like, they have the first draft of the Phoenix and the Sword. in here as well, so you get an idea of like what changed between them. They have the original story synopses for a couple of the stories also, so it's kind of interesting to see like what his general first idea was, and then you can see what the finalized version was. So from like a writing perspective and a creative perspective, this collection I think was really interesting that way.
Yeah, I also think that it's interesting to note that this collection of stories must have been just a nightmare to put together, because like nobody has a complete collection of Weird Tales with all of his stories. Like they're pieced together from his notes, from his archives, from his correspondence, from his type frames. Is that what they called the manuscripts? It was type something, but like they had to piece this together. They were riddled with spelling errors, and just like the fact that it's this polished, presentable thing that we can enjoy, and there's like a whole addendum on just spelling errors, typos, inconsistencies that were fixed, and it's like, oh, they did a lot of work to make this enjoyable. Thank you for not just presenting us with the very rough cut saying, well, here's the honest, unadulterated thing that you wanted. Like, no, that's not exactly what I wanted. I wanted this. I wanted the polished version of the original works, and I think this was a great way to enjoy it. The last question that I have for you guys: what is the next piece of Conan media that you're going to check out after reading these stories? And Mike, we'll start with you.
Well, if I could put in a plug a bit, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but Marvel, among other companies, many companies have done Conan comics over the years, and Marvel did a lot of them. But specifically, Marvel did what was a magazine size called Savage Sword of Conan, which ran for many years. And I just want to call that one out because that's the one publication where I had a letter published in it long ago. Because I made a kind of bet. A friend of mine had tried to get letters published in Marvel and never succeeded. So I went through a couple years worth of back issues, and I made a checklist of what things got your letters published. And I wrote a letter, and I hit every one of them, and the letter got published.
Nice.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
So if you're requesting any old copies of Savage Sword of Conan, I recommend that.
I went through a similar exercise with the Game Informer podcast, except instead of doing a detailed backlog of all the letters that got read, I would just think of like the weirdest crap that came to the top of my head. Like I once got a letter read. It was the letter of the week. And my question was, what's the deal with fish? Am I right? I got an autographed copy of the magazine for that. It's, yeah, you know, we're both.
What was the answer?
About 3 minutes of laughing. Like they didn't know how to process it, and like it's not even my joke. Like I got a lot of How I Met Your Mother. It's like Jason Segel goes to do stand up, and like that's his one joke. It's like, so what's the deal with fish? Am I right? Like walleyes. And I just took the first part of it and wrote in, and it's like, oh, it's the funniest thing they'd ever heard. It's like, oh, I'm just a garbage person who steals from other pop culture. So Savage Sword of Conan.
Works for you.
Savage Sword of Conan is Mike's recommendation. Patrick, what is the next piece of Conan media for you?
It did inspire me. I Googled, what Conan movies can you stream right now, and Conan the Destroyer is on Netflix. I watched that within the past week. I don't know if it even exists, but there was an online game called Age of Conan. There was a MMO RPG. I don't know if it's still around. I remember it being launched. It's probably been 15 years.
Yeah, just the right age for us.
If it's free, I might install that and give it a shot. I'd cut down some snakes.
Yeah.
I think the more recent iteration of that is Conan Exiles.
Yeah, but that's a very different game than you're probably thinking it is.
Yep.
Do I kill snakes and rescue bosomy women?
Mostly you starve to death while you try to find food desperately as a low-level character, is what I remember.
Yeah.
Oh, it sounds awesome.
Don't you start naked in it, too?
You start basically naked and alone, and it's really rough in the early stages.
Pat, let's play it together. Sounds great.
It's more like Ark Survival Evolved than anything else.
Rock and roll. So Pat's on crappy Conan MMOs. Great. Burnsy, what about you?
So I did watch Conan the Barbarian, like I mentioned before. I would like, now that I know that Conan the Destroyer is on Netflix, I'll probably watch that sometime soon. But I'm interested in watching, there was a 2011 Conan the Barbarian movie starring Jason Momoa as Conan that I never heard about.
Do you want to go in completely open, or do you want me to tell you something about that movie?
So I saw that the ratings weren't great.
But like that was during Game of Thrones, right? Because Game of Thrones came out like 2008 or 2011. So like that's Khal Drogo, height Khal Drogo.
Oh man,
Probably.
But go ahead, Mike. What's the thing that you wanted to tell us about that unfortunate film?
That it's terrible. It is just bad. It's shockingly bad. I don't know why they made it the way they did, but it's garbage. Anyway, that's my review.
Awesome. We're gonna have to watch all the Conan movies back to back to back to back, and then have a very detailed
There's
discussion
a
about them.
hierarchy of Conan movies where Barbarian's here, then Destroyer, and then if you go below the floor somewhere, you find that piece of crap.
Down in the sewer where it belongs. Awesome. Well, anything else you guys want to get off your chest about Conan the Barbarian?
Just that he knows what's best in life, which I think only one of you will get that line.
I don't get it.
I wish I could remember the quote, but I don't off the top of my head. It ends with the lamentations of their women. That is the
Lamentations
only
of the women.
Yep.
That's going to do it for our discussion on Conan the Barbarian. Next, we welcome in friend of the show, OiO Patreon supporter and local author Jake Rudquist to talk about his book, We're All Dead Here. Welcome back to the show, Jake.
Hey, Tom. Yeah, it's been a while. It was maybe a couple of years since I've been on the show, but I was on some of your initial shows way back long ago, probably 9 years ago at this point. So it's always a pleasure to be back on the show.
And 9 years ago, you were the original co-host on Outside is Overrated. And then the last time you were on the show, you didn't want me to say your last name on the air. So hopefully you're not planning anything too inflammatory. That's author Jake Rudquist talking about his book, We're All Dead Here.
Yeah, no, it's fine now. You know, back then I didn't quite know what I wanted my online persona to be, if any. Part of me just wanted to be off the online grid as much as I could. But problem now is that I'm an author, so like I have to get myself out there, including digitally, even if it's not normally my thing. So yeah, go ahead, use my name. Any kind of handles, whatever. I'm ready for the internet to find me and find my book.
All right, let's do it. That's Jake Rudquist. You want to read off your address and your social security number too, just to get kind of warmed up here?
Yeah.
Jake, tell us about your book, We're All Dead Here. You randomly texted a group of friends about a year and a half, 2 years ago, saying that you wrote a book and it's available on Amazon. It's like, oh, well, that's a cool thing. And now just tell us a little bit about the basic premise of your book.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So We're All Dead Here is a middle grade ghost story. It is a ghost story from the point of view of the ghosts. And the idea is that I just wanted to write a book that was, kind of geared towards 12-year-olds. The two main characters are spirits, a boy and a girl. They're both 12 years old. But I also wanted to write it so that it could be enjoyable for adults as well. You might be wondering, why, me as a growing dude, why I would want to write a middle grade book. And really just goes back to that was around the age when I most loved to read. That's when I discovered ghost stories and, all kinds of different things. And so it's just, it was an age group that I wanted to write to, but then also just wanted to make it so that really anyone could pick it up and read it and hopefully enjoy it.
It is very enjoyable. It was nominated by Resident Magazine as one of the best books of summer, so congratulations on that accolade. That's awesome. When you look back at the book, what are you most proud of? What do you think is the signature thing of your first novel?
Oh man, I am pretty lucky in that. I was selected to be in Resident Magazine's Best Books of the Summer. That issue is coming out late May 2025, and that in Resident Magazine is a magazine that is specifically placed in luxury hotels. My book is going to be available in kind of the little lending libraries within some of those big fancy hotels, like out in the Hamptons and New York and LA, etc. And then just locally, I'm a featured local author for Anoka County for the year 2025. How all this is happening with my first novel, I really don't know. I just got lucky. I was working on this book for kind of off and on over 10 years. So let me tell you, it wasn't good to begin with. It wasn't good for a lot of years. Took a long time to get it to the point that other people are giving me accolades. So I'm just really grateful for that.
Well, that's awesome. Congratulations on the accolades. Tell us a bit about your creative process. You've been working on this for 10 years. What does that entail? Like, did you just write this book, read it, make some edits, and then publish it? Or what goes into writing a book, Jake?
Oh man. Well, it was a long process. Back in, be over 10 years now. 2012 is when I first started it. That's when I wrote the first draft, handwritten on notebook paper.
Wow.
And I would just write whenever things would come to me, and so it was initially not planned. It was just writing it and seeing what came out of me and seeing, where the characters went. And I tried to make it a character driven story. So a lot of their choices are what move the plot along. And I put a lot of intense effort into it, kind of 2012 to 2014, and had done multiple drafts. And I had, I'd actually typed it out. It was actually on the computer and on a flash drive. And I read through it again, and I'm just like, this sucks. I just thought it was so bad. And I just put it away for a while. It went away for a long time. Came out again a few years later. I went through it a bit. I took some stuff out. I put some stuff in, then put it away again. And then really it was kind of a lockdown thing. A lot of people doing creative stuff, trying things out that they maybe thought about doing, they never did before during kind of the early part of this decade. And me revisiting this book that was a big part of it. And so a lot of intense editing and rewriting went into it. Just the last few years, I even hired an editor, have someone else go through it, a fresh set of eyes, someone who was a professional editor for one of the big publishing houses for a while. So yeah, that was it, and then we're finally ready to go, just with a digital version in 2023, and now a couple different physical covers later, here we are in 2025. So.
That's awesome. I would very much like a physical copy of your book. Well, it's interesting that you hand wrote the first draft of it, because this episode focused on Conan the Barbarian by Robert E. Howard, and he was writing in the 1930s, so there were no computers back then, so he would send typewritten drafts. How would you contrast your creative style versus the research that I know that you did for Robert E. Howard?
Oh yeah, I mean it's way different now. I mean it's I kind of did it foolishly, with the handwritten notebook. I mean, people don't need to do that. We have all this technology at our fingertips. Robert E. Howard, this is back in the early 20th century. And then, so he's banging stuff out on a typewriter. He maybe hand wrote some stuff as well. But, we kind of go about things in different ways. He was essentially a writer of pulp fiction. So his stories were initially not printed in books, but in magazines and in journals and newspapers. So kind of what he would do is he would probably, bang something out on a typewriter, few drafts, whatever, and then he would, send it off in the postal mail to some of these journals, these magazines, and these newspapers to see if they could, pick up part of a larger story, or maybe they were complete short stories. And he eventually got some success, particularly with the classic pulp magazine, Weird Tales. So that's kind of where he came from.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you said that you did it wrong by handwriting. You published a book, dude. And now you're getting awards for it. So, you didn't do anything wrong. You did the process that worked for you. And I imagine that every author's journey looks a little bit different, especially with, their first book.
Oh yeah. I mean, I would never write a book handwritten probably ever again. That was but it just felt right at the time. I mean, I didn't see myself as being an author, or even if this would go anywhere. So it kind of just writing it out by hand was just really I have the story in my head and I just need to get it out in some way. So that's where it began. And it was, only after the next couple drafts, which were on the computer, where it's okay, maybe this has potential where other people could read this and enjoy this too, besides just me. Now, of course, that all turned around when I said, I did reach a point in 2014 where I'm like, this is crap. And then it went away for a while, and it took a long time for it to come back. But, it's a it's a long, circuitous process, but it got to where it needed to go.
Yeah, that's awesome. We live in an era where it's easier than ever to self-publish novels. What's it like trying to break through the noise today? Like, what's the challenge of getting your book in front of people, selling copies, and hopefully leading to a follow-up project?
Oh, yeah, right. Well, it's wild now. I mean, it's so easy to get a book out there, easier than ever with Amazon and other things too, that anyone can write a book, especially with AI too. You don't even have to really write the thing. You can just put in some prompts. You can have AI write it for you. You can have AI design your cover. And Amazon has, and I'm just mentioning Amazon in particular because that's the biggest marketplace for books. So you have to do Amazon, regardless of how you may feel about Amazon as a company or Jeff Bezos or whatever. None of that matters. You have to do Amazon if you're going to write books. And it's just there's not a whole lot of quality control. So I would say in this day and age, it is easier than ever to write a book, to the point where anyone can write a novel. I truly think anyone can write a novel. Now, there's no guarantee that anyone's going to write a good novel, and there's certainly no guarantee that anyone's going to be able to write a successful novel, because there's just so much stuff out there. Breaking through the noise is crazy. Now, back in Robert E. Howard's day, he would just submit these stories to all kinds of these different magazines that we were talking about. And yeah, he got rejected a ton early on too, just like any other writer, but he just got being persistent, kept it going. And I think back then, I'm not going to say it was easier to be a writer, but back then there was not as much content out there teaching people how to be a writer. Certainly there was no AI in the early 20th century. So I think, publishers would just get all of these letters of these manuscripts in, typed out. And I bet within the first couple pages, people could just throw most of them away. Just like, yeah, this is crap. This person doesn't know how to write. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But so him just being persistent to the point where he just got good to grab their attention is what he needed to do. And he was highly successful in his early 20s. So I'm super jealous, but obviously he had innate talent, and he also had a vast determination to get these stories out and to get Conan into the world. So he did what he needed to do, and in 2025, it's just it's marketing, it's promotion. It's how can you get your book in front of eyeballs and get people to even be aware that it exists.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. I remember reading Stephen King's book On Writing, which is about his journey as a writer. It's like half biographical, half writing instructional manual. And he would take his rejection letters from different publishers and he would staple them to the wall as motivation to keep going and to keep improving his craft.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah, I've not read that book, but I've heard of that anecdote. Yeah. So it's you're going to get rejected. Let me tell you too, because before me being a self-published author, which is what I am, and that's how my book is out there, as you can imagine, I tried the route of trying to get a literary agent, to get me hooked up with writing with a big publishing house or even a smaller publishing house, just some kind of official publishing house. Mm-hmm. But you got to get an agent first. So I did the whole query letter process, hundreds of different potential agents, but I didn't just mass send stuff out. It was such a process of trying to find individual agents who may have some kind of inkling and being interested in what I'm doing and what my book is about, and having to tailor my query letter ever so slightly to each of them and keep track of all the query letters I have out there, and just the nature of digital communication and how easy it is to send stuff off and how easy it is to ignore all of the noise. As you can imagine, the vast majority of those people never heard anything back from them. Just ghosted. And that's typical.
Interesting to be ghosted on a ghost story. So looking forward, do you think there's potential for you to land a literary agent, and what comes next for you as a writer?
Oh, yeah. Okay, good questions. Well, let's see. I'm actually going to answer your second one first. What comes next as a writer? So I feel like this year, with the momentum of being in the magazine, being listed as a best book of the summer in Resident Magazine, being a featured local author for Anoka County, this is the year that I have to really try my best to try to make my book happen, as in selling, a significant amount of copies. That's what I'm trying to do. And then from there, there's a number in my head, which I'm not going to share. But once it sells a certain amount to hit that number, then that prompts me to begin writing the next book. And to be honest, if it doesn't hit that number, I'm probably not going to write the next book. And I know a lot of authors would say, well, come on. I mean, if you're a true writer, you just got to write the next book. You can't care about sales. You just got to keep going. And I get that. But I don't want to just write stuff that just goes into the void, and is not read. So I do want to try to make something of quality that people are going to actually read and enjoy. So that was the second thing. I forgot the first thing. What was the first question?
First thing, do you think there's any potential for you to actually land a literary agent? Now that you have a book out there and you're receiving some positive feedback on it, do you think there's potential for you to take that step and to, say, wind up with a publishing house of some sort?
I've looked into, many things. I've researched all kinds of stuff, throughout the 10 years of this book, me actively working on it and not actively working on it. And so at this point, with me being self-published with this book, it's very unlikely that this novel that I have out now will be picked up by a publishing house, because it's been out there already, for like a year and a half. It's been out there, whether digital or print or whatever. But if this book gets some more momentum, it is possible that I could get an agent and also get a deal with a publishing house to do, say, the next book. Right? To do, make this a series and then, do the sequel in the third book or whatever, so that's how it could go.
Is that what you'd want to do? Like, you have that number in your head for what would prompt the next book or what triggers the next book, but do you want to write the next chapter in Samuel and Maria and Polecat's journey, or do you want to do something completely new and fresh if you do write something else?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So without spoiling too much, I did. You've read my book. You were one of the first people who bought it. You bought a digital copy like way back in September or October 2023 when it was first available. So thanks for that.
Yeah, no problem. If a friend says they wrote a book, I'm going to buy the book, and I enjoyed reading it. You did a good job.
Yeah, thank you. So without spoiling it for people who haven't read it, I wrote it in such a way so that it could definitely continue on with another book or even more from that. But I also wrote it in such a way that, the story could essentially end right there. It's not like a cliffhanger, but it could end there, and then you could just think like, what happens next for these characters. But it could be done. So to answer your question, I would be perfectly happy to continue with those characters doing another book, possibly even another. They're ghosts; they're not going to die, so I don't have to worry about that. So we can keep doing adventures with them. Now, do I have ideas for other things that I would like to write as well? Like, more like books for adults. Do I have some ideas for that? Absolutely. I certainly do. So it's really just where it would go. I can assume that if I were to get a publisher or a literary agent or both, based on what this book has done, my guess is what they would want me to do would be to continue with these characters.
Very interesting. The author is Jake Rudquist from Minnesota. The book is We're All Dead Here. If somebody's interested in picking up your book for middle school age kids of ghost stories, what's the best way that they can support you? Where should they go pick up your book?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, as we kind of mentioned before, Amazon. If you're selling books, you have to be on Amazon. So you can type into just an Amazon search, We're All Dead Here. I will come up on there. You can buy the paperback or you can buy a digital version. I also have a website, which is a website that I just had to make up because I was advised that, you need a website if you're going to be an author. So my website is Northern Spector Publishing.com. It's a mouthful. I know. I had to try to come up with something that had not been taken already. So I got that. So that's my website. And you can, there's a link on there to get my book that way. And I'm also doing my best to get my book available in some local businesses around here. So my book is currently available in Curious Crow, which is a dork store, game store, hobby store, kind of in the northern suburbs. I'm also working on having my book being carried in The Source and having a day where I'm at The Source with my book. And then also my book is in the Anoka County Library System at more than one library. You can check my book out.
That is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, looking at Robert E. Howard versus me, he finally sold his first short story, earned him $16, which in today's money is $294. So that's pretty significant for selling just a short story. So I would, I assume that really made his day. And if, I were to get $294 outright and just one sale, not a series of sales, but one sales, that'd make me pretty happy camper as well. Well,
there you go. There's your price to own author Jake Rudquist, $294, and he will do your bidding for all time. Well, Jake, thank you so much for stopping by and chatting about your book, We're All Dead Here, and I hope that our listeners will pick it up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you happen to buy it, I'll tell you what, I would definitely appreciate it. I appreciate any ratings or reviews that people get. I know it's a broken record. It's like every YouTube video you watch, they say, "Hey, don't forget to like and subscribe." I hate that stuff, but you know what? You have to do that. So yeah, if you want to buy my book and leave a review, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, Jake's just a dude. Like, leave the review. We all have 5 minutes. We can write a review and help him reach more people.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And thanks for your review as well. And again, being an early adopter and reading my book and supporting me. And I do appreciate that quite a bit. And thanks for having me on the show again.
It's our pleasure. We'll talk to you later, Jake.
All right, see you, Tom.
And that wraps up our discussion on Conan the Barbarian. From Cimmerian to Ghostbusters, we've got a sword in one hand and a proton pack in the other. Next up on the main show, we break down the board game Ghostbusters, and then the next main episode focuses on the John Wick film franchise. On Game Club, we're playing through Claire Obscure Expedition 33 by Snadfall Interactive. You can check out our thoughts right here in the podcast feed. Joey and I also do an exclusive hour-long podcast for Pat each month and our other $10 and higher supporters on Patreon. Thank you so much for listening. Please review us on your favorite podcast platform and support our show on Patreon at patreon.com/OiO. For Pat DeGeest at Pat DeGeest, for Mike Mathwig and the Hobbybox at HobbyboxBurns on X and Twitch TV/HobbyboxBurns, I'm Tom Sidlogic at Tom Sidlogic OiO. We'll talk to you next month. Stay inside, kids.